The entire auditorium froze when Brady, the school's golden boy, held up Malachi's quiz in front of 400 students, red marker slashed across the top, not Ivy League material. The crowd laughed, the teachers didn't blink, and Malachi just stared back, silent, until he reached into his backpack and pulled out something that would flip the school upside down. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The bell hadn't even finished ringing when the roar began. In the echoing corridors of Westerbrook High, a storm of students swarmed toward the center hallway, the one just outside the cafeteria where all spectacles happened. Not because it was the largest or most important place in the school, but because that's where Brady Callister liked to stand. And wherever Brady stood, attention followed. Brady wasn't just the top student. He was the son of a congressman, the quarterback who gave up football because it bored him, the president of everything, the speaker of every assembly, blonde, tall, and always grinning like he owned the world. Because in this building he practically did. Teachers laughed at his jokes, coaches let him rewrite team rules, and the principal called him by his first name. Brady's crew, a polished pack of wealthy white students, stood around him like bodyguards made of sarcasm and privilege. They weren't bullies in the traditional sense. They didn't shove kids into lockers. They didn't steal lunch money. Their weapons were more modern ridicule, manipulation, and social annihilation broadcast on every app that mattered. Today, though, they had something special planned. "Yo," Brady called out, loud enough to turn heads all the way down the hall. "Where's our little genius? Where's Harvard Jr.?" Students parted like a curtain, and all eyes landed on Malachi Boone. Malachi stood with his back against the locker, hoodie up, earbuds in, head low. He was new. 6 months into Westerbrook's elite academic program. Brought in on a full scholarship, black, quiet, and terrifyingly smart, Malachi had already done what no transfer ever had, climbed to second place in the school rankings, right behind Brady. He hadn't spoken a word to Brady. He didn't post. He didn't party. He just outperformed, and for Brady that was enough to paint a target on his back. "Malachi," Brady shouted again, this time louder, his grin wide and fake. "You want to show us what all that GPA really means? I got a little challenge for you." Phones were already out. The crowd buzzed. A challenge. That was Brady's thing. Public games, dares, little competitions where he never lost. But this wasn't random. This was curated, and everyone knew it. Malachi didn't move at first, just slowly removed one earbud, then the other. His eyes finally lifted to meet Brady's, flat, cold, silent. Brady raised a folded piece of paper in the air. "One question. Just one. If you get it right, I'll donate $1,000 to the school library. If you get it wrong, well, you tell me. What's it worth?" There it was. The trap disguised as charity. A rigged stage, dressed like an opportunity. The crowd didn't cheer. They laughed. Nervous, excited, hungry for blood. Because this wasn't about academics. It was about power, and everyone could feel it. Malachi stepped forward, slowly. His sneakers made no sound on the tile floor, but his presence pulled tension tight across the hallway. He stopped 3 feet from Brady, looked at the folded paper, then at the cameras surrounding them. "You sure you want this?" Brady asked, his voice light but loaded. "Whole school's watching." Malachi didn't answer. He just nodded once. Brady smiled wider, theatrically unfolded the paper, and read out loud, "Solve this in under 30 seconds. A train leaves New York heading west at 80 miles per hour. 2 hours later, another train leaves the same station heading west at 100. How long until the second train catches up?" It sounded simple, but the wording was tricky. The math built for confusion under pressure. Brady didn't expect Malachi to answer. He expected him to freeze, to stammer, to fail publicly. Malachi stood still, his face unreadable. Students whispered, counting under their breath. A few snickered. Others just waited, phones aimed, ready for the moment of collapse. 20 seconds passed. Malachi said nothing. Brady leaned in. "You got 10 seconds, Einstein." Tick-tock. Then softly, clearly, Malachi answered, 4 hours. The hallway fell silent. Brady blinked. His smile faltered. Technically, Malachi was right. But Brady had the official answer sheet, pulled from an online SAT prep trick question. One with a slightly different interpretation. A technicality. Brady smirked, held up the answer sheet like it was gospel, and shook his head. "Wrong, actually. It's 3.5. Sorry, man. But hey, A for effort. Laughter exploded. Phones caught every angle of Malachi's still expression as Brady mockingly patted him on the back like a disappointed parent. And Malachi? He didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He didn't even blink. He turned and walked away, as if none of it mattered. The crowd followed him with cruel laughter, echoes of Harvard Jr. and Close But Not Black Enough bouncing off lockers. No one noticed the way Malachi's hand tightened into a fist in his hoodie pocket, or how his walk slowed just enough to let the humiliation burn fully into his memory. No one saw his eyes harden as he slipped out the side door and disappeared into the cold December air. But something had shifted. Because Malachi Boone had just made a choice, not to fight back with fists, but with something much more dangerous. He wasn't walking away. He was preparing. As the students roared with laughter, the black boy said yes, but no one saw his eyes harden. Malachi didn't go to class after the challenge. He didn't need to. He simply drifted down the empty back hallway, the one lined with dusty trophy cases, filled with victories that had nothing to do with him. The laughter behind him faded, but its echo stuck to his skin like static. He walked past plaques etched with names of valedictorians, who all looked the same, smiling, privileged, chosen. His footsteps were silent, but his thoughts weren't. Every student in that hallway had watched Brady call him out. None had stepped in. None had even hesitated. They hadn't seen a classmate or a scholar, or a person with a future. They had seen a show, a distraction, a spectacle to be consumed and forgotten by fourth period. For 6 months, Malachi had moved through Westerbrook the same way he'd walked through that hallway, noticed only when someone needed his notes, ignored when he passed by, tolerated when teachers needed to point at their one black scholarship student, during open house, invisible until needed, and most days he preferred it that way. But today wasn't most days. Today their eyes weren't ignoring him. They were watching him fall. He reached the far stairwell, and leaned against the cold metal railing, letting the air cool the heat rising under his skin. He could still hear the snickers, the whispers, the shifting weight of Brady's smirk as he held up the official answer sheet. The 4.0 student reduced to a punchline in under 30 seconds because a boy born into power decided humiliation would be more entertaining than fairness. Malachi closed his eyes tightly, trying to steady the frustration that pulsed in his chest. He didn't care about Brady, not personally, but he cared about the system that let a boy like Brady define him. A voice snapped the silence. "You okay?" Malachi turned, expecting maybe a teacher or a hall monitor, but it was Lena Crow, a quiet girl from AP Literature who usually melted into the back row, her notebooks filled with sketches. She stood a few steps down, clutching her backpack straps. Her eyes carried hesitation, as if she had rehearsed approaching him, but still doubted whether she should. Malachi straightened. "Yeah," he said softly, even though the lie felt thin. "I'm fine." "You don't look fine." Her voice was low, almost careful. What Brady did wasn't right. Malachi let out a short, controlled breath. People do what they're allowed to do. Lena looked at him for a long moment, as though trying to understand a piece of him that everyone else refused to see. "You didn't get it wrong," she murmured. "I heard you. You were right." Brady twisted it. "He made it something else. He made it something that gets views," Malachi said. "That's all they care about." Lena's gaze shifted to the trophy cases behind him. "In this school?" "Yeah." The hallway hummed with distant noise from students returning to class. Malachi knew he should walk away before he became another rumor. Scholarship kid talks back after losing. But Lena stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You know," she said, "people pretend Brady is brilliant, but all his competitions are scripted. He picks the questions, controls the crowd, and teachers just let it happen because he keeps the school relevant." Malachi didn't respond, but something in her tone made him look up. Lena hesitated again before adding, "You scared him today." That startled him. "How?" "Because you didn't fold," she said. "He expected you to panic, to crumble, to make his job easy. But you didn't." Malachi didn't know what to do with that. Fear wasn't something he associated with Brady. Arrogance, yes. Confidence, absolutely. Fear? It felt impossible. Before he could respond, the hallway door banged open, and Coach Delmar's booming voice filled the air. "Boone, principal wants you, now." Lena stepped back, startled. Malachi exhaled, as though bracing himself, and followed the coach upstairs. He didn't look back, but he sensed Lena watching him, torn between concern and the fear of being seen siding with him. He didn't blame her, not in this school. The walk to the principal's office felt longer than usual. mostly because the day had already stretched itself into something heavy and complicated. When Malachi entered, Principal Rourke stood by the window, hands clasped behind him, staring out at the football field below. He didn't turn around immediately, creating an atmosphere thick with rehearsed disappointment. "Sit," Rourke finally said. Malachi sat, careful to keep his expression neutral. Rourke turned slowly, his face arranged into an expression that mimicked concern but lacked sincerity. "Rough morning, I hear." Malachi didn't respond. The principal sighed. "When you transferred here, Malachi, I told you things would be different. This isn't your old school. Students here compete at a certain level. They challenge each other. Sometimes, publicly." He paused, letting the implication settle. Brady's challenge wasn't malicious. It was school culture. Malachi looked up sharply. "Humiliating someone is culture." Rourke's smile tightened. "What you interpret as humiliation, others see as motivation." "I didn't need motivation," Malachi replied softly. "I needed fairness." Rourke's eyelid twitched, barely noticeable, but enough to show irritation slipping through the polished facade. "Your reaction afterward caused disruption," he said. "Students were unsettled." "My reaction?" Malachi repeated. "I didn't say anything." "Exactly," Rourke said. "You walked out, during school hours." Malachi inhaled, steadying himself against the absurdity of the accusation. "I walked away so nothing would escalate." Rourke circled his desk, lowering his voice with a rehearsed tone meant to sound paternal. "Malachi, you have to understand how delicate your position here is. You're a scholarship student. Eyes are on you, expectations are different." There it was, the quiet racism, polished into administrative language. Malachi felt the words settle like cold ash. Rourke continued. "I don't want what happened today to define your time here, but you need to be mindful of how you're perceived. Brady is an anchor at this school. When you challenge him, even unintentionally, it creates tension." "I didn't challenge him," Malachi said. "He challenged me, and you accepted," Rourke replied pointedly. "Meaning you participated in the disruption." The room went still. Malachi stared at the principal, realizing with sharp clarity that this meeting wasn't about guidance or fairness. It was about containment, control, optics. The school had a narrative to protect, and Malachi, brilliant but inconvenient, had threatened it. Rourke leaned in slightly. "Malachi, let me give you a piece of advice. There are students who thrive here, and there are students who get eaten alive by this environment. You need to decide which one you want to be, because the choices you make, they follow you." Something in his tone shifted. Colder, heavier, something that wasn't just about today. Malachi felt the warning embedded beneath the words. It wasn't just caution, it was prophecy. The principal wasn't protecting him. He was predicting something, hinting at a pattern Malachi wasn't yet aware of. Before Malachi could speak, Rourke lowered his voice further and said something that froze the air between them altogether. "You're not the first scholarship student to face challenges here," he murmured. "Just don't make the same mistakes the others did." Malachi's pulse tightened. "What mistakes?" Rourke's gaze hardened, and for the first time in the conversation his mask slipped. "Some students push back in ways that cost them everything. Don't be one of them." He walked back to the window as though the matter were closed. Malachi sat still, trying to process the implication. Others before him. Others who had disappeared from this school's history. Others who had been silenced. He stood slowly, the weight of 1,000 unspoken stories pressing into his spine. As he reached the door, Rourke spoke without turning around. "Be careful who encourages you, Malachi. And be careful who watches you. Things aren't always what they seem." Malachi froze. The warning wasn't random. It was pointed, calculated, and terrifyingly familiar to something Lena had hinted about moments earlier. He stepped into the hallway with a new question burning beneath his ribs. What exactly had happened to the students who came before him? The principal's final words weren't a reprimand at all. They were a signal that something deeper and darker was already unfolding around him. Westerbrook's auditorium hadn't seen this kind of crowd in years. The student body crammed into the theater-style seating under banners that read Academic Excellence Showcase, a last-minute assembly allegedly organized by the student council to celebrate brilliance. But everyone knew who the celebration was really about. Brady Callister stood center stage under the warm buzz of stage lights, wearing his signature navy blazer and the kind of smug grin that didn't require an audience. It thrived in front of one. To most it looked like another school event, harmless. A scripted tradition. Brady had hosted every year since sophomore fall. Mind games, they called it. But this time was different. The flyers had gone out only the night before, mysteriously featuring Malachi's name as a special guest. No one asked him. No one warned him. He only found out when his AP statistics teacher handed him a slip and said, "You've been requested to represent the honor roll. Congratulations." Malachi sat now in the third row, staring at the edge of the stage, his knuckles white on the plastic armrest. The principal had not only sanctioned this, he had walked him to his seat personally, nodding like he was proud, as if this were some reward. But Malachi wasn't naive. The conversation in the office still echoed in his skull. "You're not the first, just don't make the same mistakes." This wasn't a showcase, it was a trap, set for him, packaged for the crowd, and carefully baited with institutional approval. Brady took the mic with practiced ease. "Welcome, Westerbrook. You ready for some brain battles?" The crowd cheered on cue, trained by years of school assemblies where Brady played host, MC, and savior all at once. His charm worked like a spell. Most students wanted to believe he was just a confident, charismatic guy who made school exciting. They didn't see the undercurrent. The way his games were always rigged, always one step ahead of anyone who threatened his position. And now that Malachi had risen to number 2 in the GPA rankings, it was time to cut the threat down in front of everyone. "Today," Brady continued, pacing the stage like a TED Talk veteran, "we're bringing back a crowd favorite. One question genius. We've got one seat, one brain, one shot. I'll be reading a real-world advanced problem from a national math championship, and our challenger Malachi Boone will have exactly 60 seconds to solve it." Applause. Phones came out. The lights dimmed. Malachi stood slowly, every step toward the stage feeling like it carried weight. His body moved on autopilot, but his mind spun in slow motion. He could see everything. The planted faculty clapping too hard, the camera crew from the student media team setting up at exact angles, the way the math question was sealed in an envelope carried by Brady's friend Max, like it was nuclear launch code. He reached the stage and sat opposite Brady, who extended a mic toward him with performative respect. "Anything you want to say before we begin?" Malachi took the mic. For a second, he thought about walking off, just standing up and leaving in front of everyone. But he didn't, because deep inside, something darker had started to bloom. It wasn't pride. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. If they were going to set him up, he would let them on his terms. He leaned into the mic and said simply, "Let's do it." Brady smiled like a game show host. "Love the confidence." He ripped open the envelope and read slowly. With deliberate weight, a cylindrical tank with a radius of 5 feet is being filled with water at a rate of 10 cubic feet per minute. How long will it take to fill the tank to a height of 20 feet? Gasps fluttered across the room. Even teachers stiffened. This wasn't just high level. This was university-level calculus. Most students didn't even understand the question, much less know how to solve it. Brady looked over the paper again, as if pretending it had been chosen at random. The timer began. Malachi stared at the floor. He could have solved it. In fact, he had solved this exact variation before, back at his old school's math club. He knew the formula for the volume of a cylinder, pi r car h, and he could already see the numbers forming in his mind. But he also saw something else. The trap wasn't in the answer, it was in the spectacle. They didn't want him to fail because he didn't know they wanted him to fail because they wanted to watch it happen. He lifted his eyes and met Brady's gaze. For the first time, he saw it. Beneath the confident smirk, Brady looked tense. Almost nervous. Because what if Malachi did solve it? What if he beat the golden boy in front of the entire school? Brady wouldn't let that happen. The timer ticked past 30 seconds. Malachi picked up the dry erase marker and approached the board, drawing the beginnings of a solution. He wrote, "VV pi r quartile h," then stopped, stared, and slowly, very deliberately, crossed it out. Whispers rippled through the auditorium. He turned to the crowd. "I don't know," he said into the mic. "The answer's not coming to me." The timer buzzed. Brady blinked, clearly startled, but he recovered quickly. "That's okay. Not everyone's cut out for the pressure. But give it up for Malachi, folks, for having the guts to try." The crowd applauded, some politely, others gleefully. The moment was seized. Malachi stepped down from the stage with steady steps. The cameras had what they came for. The administration would get their order restored. Brady would get another ego boost. But what none of them realized, what none of them could see, was that Malachi's failure was planned. His mistake was strategic. His silence was intentional. Because if he had solved it, if he had proven himself in that moment, they would have erased it just as fast. Called it luck. accused him of cheating, spun it into a narrative that still made Brady the hero. But by failing on purpose, by showing the crowd what they wanted to see, he gained something far more powerful than applause. He gained invisibility again. He walked back through the rows, as whispers followed him like smoke. But this time he didn't hear shame. He heard predictability. They were doing exactly what he expected. Backstage, Brady wiped his forehead behind the curtain. Max walked up, slapping his shoulder. "That was close," he muttered under his breath. He hesitated, thought he was gonna crack it. Brady didn't answer. He was too focused on the board, the way Malachi had started solving it. Confident, smooth, and then stopped. It wasn't a mistake. He didn't fail. He chose to. And that was more terrifying than anything. Meanwhile, across the auditorium, a camera from the AV club zoomed in silently on the dry erase board, before it was wiped clean. It captured everything: the formula, the numbers, the precise arc of the line that crossed it all out. And the person operating that camera, not from AV, not from student council, not even from this school. She wore a volunteer badge. She had no business being backstage. But no one questioned her, because when the powerful focus on spectacle, they forget who's watching behind the curtain. Malachi gave the wrong answer, on purpose. But someone captured the truth, and they weren't supposed to be there. The day after the assembly, Malachi didn't speak, not because he had nothing to say, but because he already knew no one would believe the truth. That he had deliberately missed the answer. That he had given them what they wanted. A staged fall, because if he had risen, they would have torn him down anyway. But truth doesn't matter in a school like Westerbrook. Stories do. And by the time second period began, the story had taken root. The genius cracked. The scholarship kid finally showed his limits. Maybe he never belonged here in the first place. It wasn't just students whispering now. It was teachers too. In the teacher's lounge, the conversations shifted. Words like overestimated, pressure, and cultural mismatch floated through the air, like perfume no one wanted to admit they smelled. Even the supportive ones spoke in coded pity. "He's just under so much stress," they'd say. "It's probably too much change for a kid from his background." That word background stung the worst. Not his intelligence, not his dedication, his background. That was always the unspeakable scar on his record. He came from somewhere they didn't understand, so it became a flaw they could weaponize. Malachi kept walking the halls in silence. But the silence followed him, not as comfort, but as judgment. His locker was no longer just a metal door. It was a stage, a microscope. People paused when passing by, lowering their voices just enough to pretend they weren't talking about him, but loud enough to ensure he could hear every syllable. Guess he's not a genius after all. Didn't he transfer from some charter school? Those scores are always inflated. Maybe he just got in to make the school look diverse. Probably can't handle the pressure. Not everyone's built for it. It was constant. Drip by drip, stripping layers off his identity, until the only thing left was doubt. Not his own. He knew who he was, but theirs. Their doubt was a virus, and it spread fast. Even Lena, the girl from the stairwell, had gone quiet. She nodded when she saw him, but the spark from before was gone. Maybe she believed the rumors now. Maybe she was just scared to be seen with him. But the cruelest part wasn't what people said. It was what they stopped saying. Teachers who once praised him for his precision now offered no feedback. The AP calculus teacher, who used to call on him with admiration, passed over his raised hand 3 times in a row. And the guidance counselor, who had once promised to help him prepare for early Ivy applications, now avoided eye contact entirely. Malachi understood. One bad performance didn't ruin an academic record. But one public failure, one that aligned with every racist assumption quietly held in that building, was enough to unravel a reputation built on brilliance. They had been waiting for this, the fall. And now that it had happened, they weren't going to let him climb again. By Friday, something inside him began to shut down. Not in defeat, but in defense. His backpack grew heavier, not from books but from the emotional weight of constantly being watched for failure. He stopped answering in class, stopped going to clubs, even skipped lunch. He started existing only in the margins, like a ghost haunting the school that had once applauded him. But even ghosts get emails. It came through just after 4th period. A simple notification on his phone. Subject: early Ivy interest. Interview opportunity, Harvard. He stared at the screen like it was a mistake. But it wasn't. It had his name, his school, a request to meet via Zoom for a preliminary conversation. This was what he had worked for. what his mother had sacrificed for, what sleepless nights and accelerated courses had been about. And yet, something in him recoiled. The glow of the screen felt radioactive, like something he wasn't allowed to touch anymore. He read it once, then again, and again. No one else knew about this message. Not the guidance office, not Brady, not even Lena. This was between him and the world beyond Westerbrook. And still his thumb hovered over the screen, not with excitement, but with fear. He wasn't scared of rejection. He was scared of carrying this version of himself, this publicly shamed, silently judged, racially diminished version, into something so sacred. What if they had seen the video? What if they had heard the whispers? What if this offer was a mistake? What if he got in, and this followed him forever? He let the phone fall into his lap. Then, with one long breath, he swiped left and hit delete. The email vanished. Gone. He didn't save it. Didn't respond. Didn't even mark it as unread to revisit later. He erased it like it was a virus. Like hope had become a liability. And as he sat there in the back of the library, his safe space now because no one came here anymore, he felt the silence wrap around him again, this time as something permanent. But in another part of the school, inside a locked AV closet, a different kind of silence stirred. The camera footage from the assembly had already been uploaded to the student server. Edited, trimmed, and color-corrected by Brady's team. The official version showed Malachi freezing, fumbling and failing. A perfect narrative arc, but one file didn't match the others. Its label was generic, img4768.wov. It wasn't supposed to be there, and the person who found it wasn't even looking. Janelle Harding, the school's IT intern, a junior nobody noticed, had been clearing out old media files when she clicked on it. The video began with the same shot, the assembly, Brady introducing the challenge. But this angle was different. Lower, off to the side, and it didn't cut away when Malachi stood to answer. It stayed on him. It captured the formula, his confident start, his precision, and then the exact moment his hand hovered over the answer. A hesitation, a deliberate cross-out, and then a flicker, a half-smile, not of failure, of defiance. Janelle paused the frame, rewound, watched again. She knew what she was seeing. She wasn't a math genius, but she could recognize intent. This wasn't a kid cracking under pressure. This was someone choosing the moment he'd be judged, and bending it. She stared at the screen for a long time, then reached for her flash drive. Outside the AV closet, the school buzzed on, unaware, uninterested, convinced they had already watched the fall. But something else had been recorded, something the school never meant to see. While rumors buried Malachi in silence, he deleted his chance at escape, unaware that someone had captured the moment he outsmarted them all. It began with a ping, then another. By the time Malachi made it to homeroom Monday morning, his phone was vibrating in waves. Not texts from friends. He didn't have many left, but pings from apps, most of which he hadn't opened in weeks. The first notification read like a slap. Westerbrook fails uploaded a new reel. Genius who froze. Attached was a thumbnail. His own face mid-expression, lips slightly parted, caught in the precise moment of hesitation during the assembly challenge. A freeze frame of doubt, the kind no one ever forgets. He tapped it open. The video lasted 10 seconds. It started with a mock drum roll. Zoomed in on Malachi standing at the whiteboard. An exaggerated voiceover. Mimicked a buzzer. "Time's up, genius." The clip cut before he spoke. Edited to make it seem like he stood there silently, until the timer ran out. Then came the memes. A black screen flashed with the phrase, "Scholarship, really?" followed by another, "He ain't built for this." But it wasn't just the text. It was the sound layered underneath. A distorted voice whispered the N-word. Twice. Low. Like a taunt beneath the fake applause. A laugh track followed. Then an explosion sound effect as if Malachi's brain had self-destructed on stage. The view count was already past 11. He scrolled to the comments. Each line stung more than the last. Overhyped affirmative action clown. Woke schools stay losing. That's what happens when you let charity cases in. Brady ended him.
Math ain't got no mercy.
He locked the phone. His hand was trembling, but his face stayed blank. The hallway around him buzzed with manufactured casualness. Students glancing and giggling, then looking away quickly when he caught their eyes. No one said anything out loud. They didn't have to. The algorithm had already spoken for them. That was the thing about social media. It didn't just show you the truth. It decided it for you. And once it decided, There was no convincing anyone otherwise. The video spread like oil on fire. Students played it on loop during lunch, chuckling over sandwiches. A teacher even referenced it with a smirk during an economics example. Just don't freeze like Malachi. Laughter followed. Even the quiet kids, the ones who used to sit near him, turned their desks away now. Malachi didn't respond. He didn't explain. Because in this place, explaining was surrender. Still, the weight crushed him. Not just the public shaming, but the fact that it wasn't true, that he had handed them a performance they twisted into a pathology. He hadn't failed. He had faked the fall. But no one wanted that version. They wanted the tragedy, the proof that the system had overreached by giving someone like him a platform. The silence was suffocating. But then came a crack in the wall. It happened late Tuesday night. Lena messaged him on the school's encrypted homework chat. No pleasantries, just a single line. Someone uploaded a second video. You need to see it. Now. Malachi stared at the message. Then the link. It was hosted on a private Vimeo channel. Anonymous. No name, no profile, no likes or shares yet. It had barely 28 views, titled simply 4-7068, not VOV, unedited. He tapped play. What he saw made his breath catch. The footage came from a different angle. Not the school's media club. Not Brady's curated shot. This was handheld, a side view, closer to the board. It captured the start of the question, the timer, and most importantly, Malachi's expression. It showed him writing the formula. It showed his hands steady. It showed the moment he hesitated, not out of confusion, but clarity. And it caught something else. The slight glance he gave Brady. A subtle, knowing look. Then the calculated cross-out of the correct answer. And finally a smirk. Barely perceptible. But there, the truth. A performance. A strategic fall. The real footage ended without commentary. No edits. No sound effects. Just the raw moment. The version that had never been meant to surface. Malachi sat frozen. Not in panic. Not in fear. But in realization, someone had seen him. Someone had captured what really happened. But who? He immediately messaged Lena. Where did this come from? No idea. She replied. It wasn't me. Someone sent it to my email with no name. No subject. Just the link. You trust it? I checked metadata. It's from the same camera that shot the school's event. But this wasn't in their official uploads. Someone held this back. Malachi stared at the final frame again. The dry erase board with the correct equation. Just before it was erased. Then he noticed something strange in the bottom right corner. A blurry reflection in the frame of the smartboard. A face. Not Brady. Not a student. An adult. A woman. Holding the camera. Not school faculty. Someone he didn't recognize. Suddenly, the prank wasn't just a student joke anymore. This went deeper. Someone else had been filming. Someone who didn't belong. And now they were sending proof to his allies in secret. But why? Who was trying to expose the truth? And more importantly, who had gone through such lengths to hide it in the first place? Someone anonymous uploaded a second video, and in its final frame, a mysterious face appeared behind the camera, one that didn't belong in the school. By Wednesday morning, the second video had made it to 3,000 views, but not on TikTok, not on Instagram, not on school forums. It existed in the shadows, forwarded quietly between inboxes, passed through burner emails, shared in encrypted chats. The truth of Malachi's performance hadn't gone viral. It had gone underground. But the first video, the doctored humiliation, was still everywhere. The school knew. The administration had seen it. Teachers had watched it. Parents had called. But instead of addressing the obvious editing, the racism, the comments laced with slurs and stereotypes, Principal Rourke stood before the student body during third period and said only this: we must take responsibility for how our school community represents itself online. The actions of some students have created unnecessary disruptions. Moving forward, all phone use is banned during school hours. Assemblies will be tightly monitored, and any student who uploads or shares misleading content will face disciplinary action. He never mentioned Malachi by name, never mentioned the slurs, never addressed the first video's cruelty, or the second video's correction. And somehow, Brady Callister had become the face of the solution. That same afternoon, the school newsletter posted an article titled, Leading Through the Storm, How Brady Callister Restored Calm After Chaos. It featured a photo of Brady smiling with the principal, arms folded, standing in front of the school seal like generals after a war. The article praised his grace under fire, his willingness to engage his peers in positive academic dialogue, and his unshakable leadership in moments of misunderstanding. Malachi wasn't just invisible again. He was actively being erased. That was the cost of speaking without permission, of existing without apology. Even the teachers who had once clapped the hardest at Malachi's early wins now kept their heads down. The AV teacher removed all footage of the event from the school's internal server for liability reasons. The AP math teacher stopped assigning group work altogether to avoid interpersonal distractions, and the guidance counselor emailed Malachi a generic link to resilience resources for high-achieving students, with a smiling emoji at the end, like it was all just academic stress. But this wasn't about stress. This was punishment. Not for failing, for daring to expose the game, and refusing to play it their way. Even Lena, who had been his quiet ally, started getting questioned. A teacher pulled her aside during art class and asked if she'd been pressured into supporting a disruption narrative. Another student told her she'd been added to a private group chat of suspected instigators. She hadn't posted anything publicly, but guilt by association was all they needed. That week, students of color across campus felt a chill they couldn't explain. Locker checks increased in certain halls. 2 seniors from the diversity club were suspended for allegedly skipping class, even though they were in the library. A biracial freshman was stopped and asked where he was really from, by a substitute who claimed he didn't look like he belonged in the honors section. No one said these things were connected. They didn't have to. The institution had spoken. The line had been drawn, not by policy, but by precedent. Malachi moved through it all like a body still breathing, but no longer alive. He stopped raising his hand, stopped submitting homework on time. Teachers noted his attitude shift, but no one asked why. They didn't want to know. They wanted closure. Silence. Stability. He was a loose wire in a system addicted to order. Until one morning, just as he was leaving the library, a stranger stopped him near the side doors. She looked out of place immediately. Not a student. Older. Maybe late 30s. A former teacher, maybe? Her clothes were simple but worn with purpose. In one hand she carried a manila folder. In the other, a staff ID badge that looked like it hadn't been used in years. "Malachi Boone?" she asked. He paused. "Yeah, I taught here," she said. "Years ago, before they rewrote the policy manual. Before they got rid of us." He looked at her closely. The name tag read, S. Temple, faculty. "I saw the video," she said. "Both of them. What they're doing to you. It's not new. It's just the latest version." Malachi didn't answer. He didn't know how to. His body was tense, his fingers still curled around his book bag strap, ready to walk away. But then she handed him the folder, written across the front in black ink. Systemic suppression reports. Malachi took it slowly, almost afraid to open it. The woman didn't explain. She just nodded and said, "Read it. You're not the first, but you might be the last they do this to, if you're smart." Before he could ask more, she turned and walked away, down the back hallway, toward the exit near the old gym, the one that didn't even lock properly anymore. He opened the folder. Inside, documents, emails, incident reports, all redacted, all buried, each one a case, each one a name. Black and brown students who had transferred in, climbed ranks, and disappeared. Sudden expulsions, sudden academic integrity violations, sudden allegations of code of conduct breaches. Most of the names were unfamiliar. But then, halfway through the folder, he saw it. Aaron Boone, Malachi's cousin, expelled sophomore year, allegedly for harassment of a faculty member. But the internal report said something different. Aaron Boone was removed from the honor roll after a series of challenges to the standardized testing schedule, reported excessive confidence and repeated contradiction of faculty guidance. Staff found him disruptive to the academic balance. Malachi's hands shook as he flipped the page. There were photos, student rankings from 5 years ago. Aaron had been number 1 for almost an entire semester, and then gone, erased, just like they were trying to do to Malachi now. Only this time, someone had kept the receipts. A former teacher handed Malachi a folder labeled Systemic Suppression Reports, and inside it, buried beneath years of redacted names, was his cousin Aaron, the first black student erased the exact same way. Malachi didn't sleep that night. The folder sat like a weight on his desk, its edges slightly frayed, its contents too large to fold back into silence. Every page he turned felt like another slap to the face. Email chains that hinted at quiet removals, teacher comments describing patterned arrogance, handwritten notes with phrases like overrepresentation risks, and maintain cultural balance, all veiled racism, all thinly disguised behind institutional tone. And then Aaron's name. stamped across a report like a warning label. Removed from honors tracking due to persistent friction with academic environment. Malachi stared at that sentence until the words blurred. Aaron hadn't just left. He had been erased. And now Malachi understood. His fall wasn't accidental. It was inherent. The next morning, he skipped first period, walked straight past the cafeteria, down the east hallway, to the one part of campus most students never visited, the archives room. Buried inside the old wing of the library, it was where senior theses were stored, where staff meeting minutes went to die, and where historical records from past student councils were boxed and forgotten. If anything about Aaron had been preserved, anything real, not redacted, it would be here. The library itself had always felt like a sanctuary to Malachi. The silence, the structure, the rules, it all made sense. But today even that space felt rigged. He moved through the front desk area, and into the back, passing students who barely looked up. The archived records weren't digitized by design. He was starting to realize that kind of obscurity wasn't laziness. It was control. The door to the archives was locked, as expected. He went to the front desk where Ms. Hawthorne, the school's head librarian, stood scanning barcodes into the database. She was always polite, but never warm, neutral in the way adults at Westerbrook learned to be when dealing with students they didn't expect to last long. "I need access to the archives," Malachi said, voice steady. Ms. Hawthorne didn't even look up. "That room is staff only, unless you have an approved project. I'm looking into past honor roll records. Student placement discrepancies." That got her attention. She raised an eyebrow. "What for?" "Personal comparison," Malachi replied, carefully choosing every word. "It's related to a report I'm preparing." She frowned, tapped something on her keyboard. "Name?" He gave it. She typed, waited, looked back up. "No record of a report request or teacher sponsorship. You'll need to submit a form and wait for approval from the principal's office. Can I just see the files under supervision?" "No," she said flatly. "Process exists for a reason." Malachi held her gaze for a moment. He knew that face. It was the same expression the principal wore when issuing fake concern. The same expression Brady wore while twisting public performance into public pain. "I'll come back," Malachi said quietly. But he didn't leave. Instead, he walked to the side hallway, waited behind a bookshelf until the noise at the desk returned to normal. Then, quietly, he slipped back toward the archives door again. It was old, brass key lock, no swipe access, not digital, which meant not monitored by campus systems. He pulled a bobby pin from the hem of his backpack strap. Aaron had taught him that, back when they were kids. Sometimes truth isn't locked because it's dangerous, he'd said. It's locked because they're scared someone might actually believe it. Malachi's hands worked quickly, heart pounding. Click. The door creaked open. Dust hit his nose first. Then silence. Then shelves. Metal. Gray. Labeled by year. Student council logs. GPA rankings. Disciplinary actions. Most handwritten. Some in binders. It was colder here. He moved quickly, scanning the tags, looking for 2017. Aaron's final semester. Just as he reached for the box labeled Spring 2017, Honor Council notes, a voice barked behind him, "Step away from the shelf. Now." Two security officers stood in the doorway, one already reaching for his radio. Malachi didn't argue, didn't flinch, just raised his hands slightly and took a step back. "You're not authorized to be in here," the taller guard said, stepping inside. "Let's go." Miss Hawthorne stood behind them, lips pursed. Malachi said nothing as they escorted him out. The walk through the library felt like a parade. Students whispered. One girl filmed it on her phone before a teacher swatted it down. At the front desk, Miss Hawthorne scribbled something into a folder. "He attempted unauthorized access to confidential records," she said sharply. "This will be reported." Malachi turned to her, calm but clear. "You're protecting something. You know it." Her eyes narrowed. "I'm following protocol. You should try it." They led him out through the East Wing exit. The sun stung. He stood on the steps, humiliated but not defeated. This was what happened when you tried to access buried truths in a system that existed to bury them. He felt the rage rise, but forced it down. Not now. Not here. Then, just as the door behind him clicked shut, he heard a voice. "You looked like him when he got caught too." Malachi turned. A janitor stood near the edge of the loading dock, pushing a mop bucket. He was older, gray at the temples, face lined by years of working unnoticed. His uniform was stained, name tag faded. "Dennis." "What did you say?" Malachi asked, stepping closer. The man didn't answer. just pulled a rag from his pocket, wiped his hands slowly, then nodded toward the dumpster. Malachi followed his gaze. There, tucked just behind the blue recycling bin, was a small Ziploc bag taped under the rim. Inside, wrapped in layers of paper towel, was a USB drive. Old, scuffed, black. Dennis glanced once over his shoulder, then said just 4 words before turning back to his mop. "This isn't the first time." Malachi crouched, pulled the bag loose, heart hammering now, not with fear, but with the weight of what he was holding. The janitor was gone before he looked back up. Alone now, Malachi stood on the loading dock, gripping the small plastic drive that suddenly felt heavier than the folder in his backpack, heavier than all the redacted names, heavier than the silence they had built into the walls of this school. A janitor handed Malachi a hidden USB drive with one chilling sentence. "This isn't the first time." Malachi sat alone in the back corner of the computer lab, far from the main monitors and shielded by a low divider wall that offered just enough privacy. The USB drive Dennis had handed him felt warm from being in his pocket too long. Its scratched plastic exterior gritty beneath his fingers. It wasn't labeled, but something about the way it had been wrapped carefully, intentionally, told him it wasn't just files. It was testimony. Memory. He inserted it into the port and waited. The screen blinked. One folder appeared. Pattern 3 buys open with caution. His pulse climbed. Inside the folder, 9 video files, 5 PDFs, and 1 document titled "Read First." He opened it. The document wasn't long, just a typed note. No name, no signature. "This isn't new. Every 3 years, one of us rises. Quiet, focused, black. And every 3 years, we fall. Loud, public, humiliated. I tracked it for 11 years. The cycle. The system doesn't crack. It reloads. Start with the videos. Watch all 9. Then read the testimonies. You're not the first, but you can be the last." Malachi's throat tightened. He opened the first video. It was grainy, handheld, clearly taken from a hidden phone, years before high-def cameras were common. A black boy stood in the middle of the school auditorium, surrounded by laughter. The sound was muffled, but the scene was clear. Another public challenge. A complicated science riddle. The boy froze, or appeared to. The crowd turned on him in seconds. Laughter, taunts, a chant, "Guess he's not that smart." Below the video, a caption was added by whoever compiled the folder. 2011. Khalil Wren, GPA 4.3. Applied to MIT. Expelled 2 weeks later after being accused of grade manipulation. No charges filed. No appeal granted. Malachi stared at the frozen frame, Khalil's eyes wide and confused. A look Malachi now knew too well. He opened the second video. A black girl this time. Debate finals. Footage caught the moment she outperformed the team captain. A white boy. The camera shifted to a teacher whispering something to the judges. The next frame showed her being escorted off the stage. Alicia Green, GPA 4.1, accused of disruptive behavior after an email she never sent was forwarded to administration. No investigation. Scholarship rescinded. Malachi clicked through each file, watching the pattern unfold with precision. A new face every 3 years. Each one followed the same rhythm. Rise quietly, outperform expectations, threaten the structure, and then collapse. Not because they failed, but because someone pulled the ground out from beneath them. Each of these students had been silenced, and no one had stopped it. The fourth file was labeled Aaron Boone. His hand froze on the mouse. He hadn't seen video of his cousin since freshman year, the last time Aaron visited for Thanksgiving, before disappearing into silence and shame. The family never talked about what happened. All Malachi knew was that Aaron went from being the smartest person he knew to someone who stopped responding to messages. The video opened with hallway footage. Aaron was mid-speech in what looked like a student-led protest. He was standing in front of the administration office, holding a manila folder, the same kind Malachi had received days ago. His voice was passionate, steady, but urgent. "They tell us to work twice as hard, to stay out of trouble, and then when we rise, they pull us down, because we don't fit the picture they want to paint. Look at the GPA data. Look at the faculty emails. They knew. They all knew." Then the camera shook. 2 staff members appeared. The video cut quickly, then resumed again, this time blurry and further back. Aaron being led away, his backpack ripped from his shoulder. One staff member holding up a printed sheet, like it was a warrant. The caption was shorter this time. Aaron Boone. Class of 2017. Expelled for inappropriate contact with a staff member. No incident report filed. No footage ever released. Family offered confidential agreement. Malachi stopped breathing for a moment. There it was. The school didn't just erase Aaron. They repackaged his truth into a scandal. And then they buried it. He leaned back, eyes stinging. The same quiet rage that had first hit him in Principal Rourke's office, now boiled into something more dangerous. Not just for him but for everyone complicit in keeping the system alive. Malachi had come here thinking he was under attack because he was new, because he had slipped through their filters. But this wasn't new. This was design. The PDFs were testimonies. Some typed, others scanned from handwritten pages. Each told the same story with different faces. Students targeted, set up, and then offered quiet transfers in exchange for silence. One file included a list of faculty known to cooperate, teachers who provided misleading grades, deans who signed pre-written expulsion forms, tech staff who wiped evidence. And the worst part, some were still there, still teaching, still smiling in the hall, still shaking hands with the next generation of victims. Malachi opened the final PDF. It was a timeline. A clean, color-coded chart of every incident, stretching back to 2005, every 3 years, like clockwork. Each name marked with a red dot. All black students, all in the top 5% of their class. At the bottom of the file, one last note. 2023, target not yet confirmed. Candidate likely to be chosen by October based on rankings. The system will try again, unless someone makes it stop. The timestamp on the file was 9 months old. Whoever created this, whoever tracked the cycle, had already predicted Malachi. They had seen this coming. They had tried to leave a map, and the last red dot on the page was already circled in bold. Boon, pending collapse. Malachi closed the folder. The room felt colder now, like the walls were pulling inward. The air in the lab thinned. Everything he had thought was an isolated attack on him was part of a practiced system, a machine. He hadn't failed. He had been selected, and yet, he had survived the fall. They hadn't predicted that. That was the difference. That was the crack. He stood slowly, the chair creaking behind him. Then he clicked eject USB, pulled the drive free, and pocketed it again. But just as he was about to log off, one final file caught his eye. One that hadn't appeared before. It was labeled Cam14 survived.erg, a compressed archive, password protected. The file was dated only 3 days ago, long after the USB had supposedly been sealed and hidden, which meant someone had added to it after Dennis gave it to him, which meant someone else was still watching, still moving, still feeding the machine. Malachi saw the face of the last victim, his own cousin, expelled and erased. But a new encrypted file had just appeared on the USB, one dated after it left the janitor's hands. Someone else was still inside the system. It started with an absence. Brady Collister missed homeroom 2 days in a row. An unthinkable break in pattern for a student who had once bragged about perfect attendance since middle school. At first, teachers chalked it up to college visits. The announcement board even listed his name as excused for academic enrichment. But no one really believed that, because Brady wasn't posting about college tours. He wasn't posting anything at all. His Instagram, once a grid of carefully curated selfies, charity event photos, and shirtless beach pics, was scrubbed clean overnight. His TikTok account vanished. His LinkedIn deleted. Even his Venmo went private. To most people, it looked like a rebrand, maybe a break from the chaos. But Lena noticed it first. Then Janelle. Then everyone else who had seen the second video. The real one. The one Brady never thought would surface. Something had shifted. Malachi didn't speak about it publicly, but he watched it unfold with silent clarity. Brady, once the orchestrator of attention, was now trying to disappear. The hallway energy changed too. His friends still laughed loudly, but their eyes flicked toward empty chairs in calculus. The student council met without him. Announcements were read by someone else. And though no one said it aloud, everyone felt it. The golden boy was unraveling. At first there was speculation. Maybe Brady was planning something bigger, a dramatic comeback, a media spin, a new scholarship angle. But the cracks deepened fast. Teachers began mentioning missed assignments. The morning show, which Brady used to host, aired rerun. When one student casually asked in group chat, "Where's Brady?" another replied, "In hiding law." But behind the jokes, there was a murmur growing. Because everyone had seen the first video, Malachi's staged failure, and now more were seeing the second one. The one that showed him hesitate not because he didn't know the answer, but because he was choosing to fall. And if Malachi hadn't failed, then Brady hadn't won. That truth, ugly, unspoken, began to rot the walls of the image Brady had built for years. By the end of the week, he had pulled out of the winter showcase. The interview with the regional news team was canceled. The college counselor confirmed that Brady was no longer seeking early admission to his first-choice school. Then came the hallway rumors. People whispering that he had cried in a faculty bathroom, that he had stormed out of a student council meeting when someone mentioned Malachi's name. Malachi didn't celebrate it. Not out loud. There was no joy in watching someone break, even if that person had led the charge to destroy you. But there was a strange kind of justice in the silence surrounding Brady now. It wasn't what Malachi wanted, but it was what the system had feared most. The unraveling of their golden boy, not at the hands of violence, but by the quiet collapse of his own guilt. It wasn't long before that guilt started leaking out. An anonymous Instagram account appeared over the weekend. Eddie Collister confession. Its bio read, "Things aren't always what they seem, especially at Westerbrook." At first it posted vague quotes. Image is everything until someone sees the truth. Legacy is a cage made of compliments. But then it escalated. Sunday night, a screenshot dropped. Brady's name in a message thread. Time-stamped, unmistakably linked to his personal account. The messages weren't hateful. They weren't arrogant. They were terrified. "I think we went too far. This was supposed to be a joke." He wasn't supposed to crack. He was supposed to leave. Then another message, this time to someone unnamed. What if the wrong person saw the real footage? That wasn't supposed to be uploaded. The post exploded. The comments were a firestorm of confusion, shock, and quiet celebration. Wait, is this real? He knew Malachi didn't fail. They set him up. This school is foul. By morning, the account had over 12,000 followers. Students refreshed it between classes. The administration tried to contain the damage, announcements about misinformation, emails reminding students about digital citizenship. But it was too late. The digital wall had cracked, and everything behind it was rushing out. Brady didn't come to school that day. His friends were silent, and then another screenshot surfaced. This one changed everything. Because in the new post, there wasn't just guilt. There was a confession. It wasn't the first time. They told us how to do it. They pick the one who's getting too loud, and we set the stage. Every 3 years. It's like tradition. Malachi read the message 3 times. He already knew it. He had lived it. But seeing it written, in Brady's words, wasn't just validation. It was confirmation that this pattern wasn't a theory. It was a cycle, a designed ritual. And the school didn't just allow it. It trained them for it. An anonymous account leaked Brady's private DMs, revealing not just guilt, but proof that the humiliation of black students at Westerbrook was a calculated generational ritual. The encrypted file sat like a ticking clock on Malachi's desktop, blinking back at him with the kind of quiet authority that made everything else in the room vanish. Cam 114 survived. .arch. Password protected. Time-stamped 3 days ago. And not listed in the original folder's documentation. Whoever had added this wasn't Dennis. This was someone else. Someone who still had access. Malachi stared at it for nearly 15 minutes before moving. He copied it to a separate flash drive and wiped it from the lab computer entirely. If someone was watching, he didn't want them knowing he'd seen it. Not yet. Then he packed his things and walked out of the building. The USB clenched in his fist. The other folder zipped tightly inside his bag. By the time he got back to his apartment, Lena was already waiting outside. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. The moment she saw his face, she knew something had changed. They went inside, locked the door, and Malachi plugged in the drive. "I found more than just records," he said. "I found the pattern." She sat beside him as the files loaded. He opened the folder again, showed her the videos, the notes, the timeline. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the testimony PDFs, each one naming a different student, names she'd seen in yearbooks, faces now erased from any official platform. "This isn't just racism," Lena whispered. "This is policy." Malachi nodded. "Every 3 years. Like a reset. But it's not just students who did it." He opened the latest messages from the anonymous account that had been leaking Brady's DMs. A new batch had dropped that morning. Screenshots of group chats between faculty and certain student leaders. Phrases like "make sure this one breaks early," and "don't let him peek too close to graduation." One message included a forwarded email from a faculty account with the subject line, "Challenge Framework, Class of 20. Lena's breath caught. They gave them instructions. It was there in black and white. a proposal disguised as a performance opportunity, where top students would be informally challenged to ensure healthy academic competitiveness. But every name listed under challenge candidates was black. Every coordinator listed was white. One of the emails had been sent by Mr. Kelman, head of the debate team, faculty advisor to the student council, and Westerbrook's longest-serving equity officer. He'd once given Malachi a book about Frederick Douglass. He'd shaken his hand after the first quarter GPA results, and yet here he was, in the thread's earliest messages, suggesting optics-heavy pressure opportunities for students who rise too quickly above the mean. Lena stood up. This can't just stay in here. You have to go public. Malachi looked at her. And what happens when I do? They spin it. Say the documents were faked. Say I manipulated footage. Say I hacked school records. They can't do that if you leak everything, she said. All of it. Make it public before they can edit it. He hesitated. If we do this, it doesn't just hurt them. It burns the entire reputation of this school. Lena didn't blink. Maybe it should. They uploaded the documents to a private server, added passwords, compiled the timelines and videos into OneDrive, then sent it, anonymously, to 5 local journalists, 2 national outlets, and a legal watchdog nonprofit that had investigated other schools for discrimination-based expulsions. Then they waited. It didn't take long. By Monday morning, local news vans were parked outside the front gates of Westerbrook. Reporters with boom mics stood on sidewalks, filming intros against the school's gleaming facade. The principal issued a statement by noon calling the leaks malicious and deeply misleading. But the news sites weren't buying it. Within hours, screenshots from the faculty chat rooms had been plastered across news tickers. One line was repeated more than any other. Challenge should end with visible hesitation or confusion. It builds credibility for the loss. The pressure cracked first in the faculty meeting. 2 staff members resigned within 24 hours. But the real collapse began in the parking lot. It happened just after school ended. The last bell had rung, and students were filing out when a police cruiser pulled up near the faculty entrance. Malachi watched from across the lawn, heart pounding. 2 officers stepped out, walked calmly, entered the building. Minutes passed. Then Mr. Coleman emerged, flanked by both officers, hands behind his back. The crowd gasped. Phones shot into the air. Someone dropped their backpack. Mr. Kelman's face was pale, lips tight, eyes scanning the students as though searching for a lifeline that wouldn't come. Whispers erupted instantly. They arrested Kelman? What's going on? This is real. This whole thing is real. The officers guided him toward the car. One student asked what the charges were. No one answered, but a news site posted it just minutes later. Westerbrook faculty advisor, arrested for coercion, bribery, and conspiracy to falsify academic records. The article quoted internal messages, student reports, and a redacted legal complaint from one former student, now in their 20s, who had finally come forward after seeing the leaked materials. The system was bleeding now, but even as cameras swarmed and headlines exploded, Malachi couldn't look away from the fact that Kelman, the man who had shaped so many academic programs, had done it all under the veil of meritocracy. He hadn't yelled. He hadn't threatened. He had orchestrated, quietly, professionally, with the kind of decorum that made him untouchable, until now. Lena grabbed Malachi's sleeve, as they watched from the crowd. They're going to come for you next. You know that, right? Malachi nodded. Let them. Because for the first time since walking through Westerbrook's doors, he wasn't alone. And the silence they had built for years, it had just been shattered. As cameras rolled and the crowd watched, the school's debate coach was let out in cuffs, but inside the admin building, the vice principal was already deleting files from a hidden server labeled Retention Strategy Phase. The next morning, the parking lot wasn't just a place for student drop-offs. It had become a front line. Even before the first bell, clusters of students were gathered outside the gates, not waiting for rides, but standing shoulder to shoulder, holding hand-painted signs, and wearing silence like armor. There were no megaphones, no chants yet, just a pressure in the air, tension that made even the security guards hesitate before stepping forward. At the center of it all stood a girl in a burgundy hoodie, holding up a cardboard square with 4 bold words, "Am I next?" The phrase had appeared overnight, in group chats, anonymous story reposts, and class DMs. Students had seen the videos, they'd read the emails, they'd watched Mr. Kelman get taken out in cuffs. But it wasn't just about Brady anymore. It wasn't even about Malachi. It was about the machine behind the curtain, and how many more names it planned to feed itself before someone stopped it. Malachi stood across the lot, watching from the edge of the sidewalk, heart beating slow but deep. He hadn't called for this. He hadn't organized anything, but here they were. Dozens of them. Some he knew, most he didn't. And they weren't hiding anymore. Within minutes the silence gave way to voices. Justice for Boone. End the cycle. No more silence. Students held their phones high, live streaming the moment, as faculty peeked nervously through classroom windows. Security radioed in. Updates. And the principal's assistant rushed out the front office doors, clutching a clipboard that looked ridiculous against the wave of teenage defiance rising in front of her. Lena found Malachi and stood beside him without a word. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. This was bigger now. It wasn't just about exposing the system. It was about demanding an end to it. And then someone stepped forward. Janelle, the quiet IT intern who had first spotted the unreleased footage in the school's AV closet. She held a USB in one hand and a hand-lettered sign in the other. The sign read, "You erased their names. We'll remember all of them." She began reading names out loud, one by one. Khalil Wren, Alicia Green, Aaron Boone. With each name, another student repeated it, then another, until the parking lot echoed like a roll call of the erased. Inside the school, the administrators moved fast. Emails were fired off. Announcements crackled through the PA. Please return to your classrooms. This is not a sanctioned event. But no one moved. More students poured out from the building. Some walked out of classrooms mid-lecture. Others slipped through back doors. The crowd grew to nearly 100. Signs waved. Voices rose. News crews were already pulling up at the street corner, alerted by the growing hashtag #DoingBoone_NotBroken. Then the principal stepped outside. Rourke's expression was tight. A mask stretched too thin to hide what he was really thinking. He was flanked by 2 other administrators and a school police officer, who kept his arms folded, sunglasses down despite the overcast sky. The principal raised a hand, but the crowd didn't stop. He cleared his throat, lifted a small microphone clip to his shirt, and began speaking. We understand the concern many of you are expressing, but we must remind you that school property is not a place for unauthorized gatherings. This disruption was your cover-up, someone shouted. The crowd roared. Rourke's face barely twitched, but Malachi saw it. The crack. The slip. He was losing control, not just of the students, but of the story. A reporter shoved a mic forward. Principal Rourke, were you aware of the challenge framework emails being circulated among your staff? He stammered. We are conducting an internal review. Did you approve targeting minority students for public failure? We categorically deny. Then why were the same patterns repeated every 3 years for over a decade? He had no answer. Students began chanting again, louder this time. Not just Malachi's name, but the names Janelle had read. A chorus of ghosts, brought back to life in protest. And then the unthinkable happened. The principal stepped down from the curb, walked directly to Malachi, and handed him a sealed envelope. This is for you, he said curtly. You are suspended, effective immediately. 5 days. Grounds. Instigating unauthorized unrest. Gasps cut through the crowd. Even the police officer blinked. Malachi stared at the envelope. His hands didn't move. He hadn't led the protest. He hadn't spoken. He hadn't lifted a single sign. But in their eyes, just his presence, his survival was threat enough to warrant removal. A girl in the crowd screamed, "You're suspending the victim?" Another shouted, "How do you suspend someone for being proven right?" Rourke turned and walked away without answering. But the damage was done. The protest had become an indictment. The school had made its next move. Not to restore order, but to double down on control. Lena stepped beside Malachi and whispered, "They think taking you out will stop this." He shook his head. "They don't get it. They can't stop what they didn't start." She took the envelope from his hand and tore it in half, then held it up for the cameras. "Westerbrook wants silence," she shouted. "So let's get louder." The crowd erupted. But inside the front office, behind the mirrored windows where no one could see, a figure watched quietly. Vice Principal Holt. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't reacting. He was on a phone call, and on his screen, open on his desk, was a confidential folder labeled External Communications, Partner Schools, Suppression Playbook, Draft A. As Malachi was suspended for instigating unrest, a hidden document in the vice principal's office revealed plans to share Westerbrook's suppression strategies with other elite schools across the country. The day after Malachi's suspension, the school felt different. Not calmer. Never calmer, but tense in a new, unfamiliar way. It was the kind of stillness that comes not before a storm but before an avalanche. Students walked the hallways whispering, Teachers clutched folders tighter, and administrators flinched at every distant sound. Even the usual chatter in the cafeteria had dimmed to a low hum, like everyone knew something was coming but didn't know which direction it would hit from. Malachi, forced to stay home, sat in the living room with his laptop open, and the news playing softly in the background. His mother moved around the kitchen in short, restless motions, pretending she wasn't listening, pretending she wasn't checking her phone every 2 minutes for updates. But the silence between them spoke louder than anything else. She had lived through enough injustice to recognize the signs of one building, and this time it was unfolding around her son. On the screen, breaking news banners cut across the bottom. Whistleblower footage sparked state review of Westerbrook High, but it wasn't the footage that would shift the nation. It was what came next. At precisely 3:00 p.m., a local news anchor appeared on screen, her tone steady, her expression serious, her voice carrying the weight of something that would be replayed across the country within hours. In an exclusive interview, she announced, "A student closely connected to the recent controversy at Westerbrook High has provided confidential testimony that may reshape the investigation." Malachi froze. Lena, watching from her dorm-like bedroom in her parents' small house, texted him instantly, "Turn the volume up." On screen, the anchor leaned slightly forward, lowering her voice, as if leaning into the gravity of her own report. "The student whose identity we are protecting due to safety concerns revealed disturbing information about a coordinated system of academic sabotage. According to this source, students, particularly high-ranking white students, were instructed to place strategic pressure on specific black students through staged challenges, misleading evaluations, and coordinated humiliation tactics." Malachi's heart pounded, the room shrinking around him. Then came the quote. The reporter paused, then read it. "We were told to make him snap." Silence. 4 words that exploded like gasoline hitting open flame. Brady's voice. Shaken, drained, recorded in a whisper, played over a blurred silhouette. The audio had been distorted, but the words rang unmistakably clear. The confession echoed through the television, with an intimacy that made Malachi's chest tighten. His mother sank into the nearest chair, covering her mouth. "Oh God." The interview continued, the anchor translating Brady's full testimony. The student revealed that these challenges were not spontaneous, but part of an unofficial tradition passed down through certain faculty members and student leaders. The goal was to maintain a particular academic hierarchy, manipulate student records, and prevent black scholarship students from surpassing predetermined thresholds. The footage shifted to an outside shot of the news station, then to clips from the protest, then back to the anchor. Malachi closed his eyes. He had expected resistance, pushback, maybe denial, but he hadn't expected Brady, the school's golden boy, the one raised on privilege like oxygen, to finally break open the truth. He hadn't expected him to admit it, and certainly not publicly. His phone erupted with messages, from Lena, from Janelle, from students he barely knew. But he didn't answer. He watched as the anchor continued, her voice steady but burning with urgency. "The whistleblower states that staff members endorse these tactics to prevent instability in academic identity and to guard the reputation of Westerbrook's advanced placement program. These phrases appear in internal documents now leaked to our investigative team." Another pause. A breath. "And in light of these revelations, the State Education Board has released the following statement." A new speaker appeared on screen, a state official standing at a podium, flanked by flags and stacks of thick binders. "We are formally launching a full-scale investigation into Westerbrook High School," the official declared, effective immediately. "This includes subpoenas for administrators, faculty members, and certain students. We have reason to believe this is not an isolated event, but part of an entrenched culture of systemic discrimination." The press room erupted in flashes of cameras. Reporters shouted questions, but the official continued with unwavering authority. "We will not tolerate institutional manipulation of student outcomes. We will not tolerate racially targeted intimidation, and we will not tolerate deliberate suppression of academic merit under the guise of tradition." Then it came. The moment the school could never reverse. "We are issuing a subpoena for Principal Daniel Rourke." Malachi leaned forward, almost breathless. His mother whispered, "They're coming for him." Finally. But the anchor wasn't done. She shifted in her chair, eyes sharp, tone dropping lower. "And in a further development, we have obtained footage from a hidden internal server, allegedly maintained within the school's administrative wing. This server contains documents labeled Retention Strategy, Phase 2, which reference coordination with other academic institutions." Malachi felt the room tilt. Phase 2. He had seen that label. The vice principal had been deleting files under it mere hours before. His mind moved quickly. If the journalist had obtained something from that server, then someone inside administration was leaking too. Someone with access. Someone high enough to retrieve it before it was wiped. His phone buzzed again. Lena this time. This is bigger than Westerbrook. But before he could respond, the interview cut to footage of the protest, student voices shouting his name, the torn suspension letter in Lena's fist, teachers staring out windows like people watching history swallow them whole. The anchor's voice returned. Students rallied last week, demanding accountability and transparency. Their calls appear to have reached the state level. Multiple faculty members are now under review. More subpoenas are expected. Then came the final blow. In the next 48 hours, Westerbrook High may be required to hand over all internal records related to student assessment, disciplinary action, faculty communications, and archived footage. Failure to comply will trigger federal oversight. Malachi closed his laptop slowly. The quiet in the room felt charged, the kind that builds right before a structural collapse. His mother finally spoke, voice rough but steady. They're fighting back, but they're not fighting just for you, Malachi. They're fighting for everyone who didn't get this chance. He swallowed hard. Yeah, I know. She looked at him, really looked with an expression he hadn't seen in months. Not worry, not exhaustion, something deeper, older, pride wrapped in fear. What happens next? She asked quietly. Malachi didn't answer at first. He stood up, walked to the window, stared at the street below, where a pair of reporters were already knocking on doors, looking for neighbors who might have seen the boy at the center of the scandal. He breathed in slowly. They're going to try to twist this, he said finally. Rourke, Holt, whoever else was part of it. They'll try to turn everything upside down. Claim the videos were faked, that Brady was coerced, that the protests were orchestrated. His mom stepped beside him. Do you think they can? He shook his head. Not anymore. Too many eyes are on them now. But even as he said it, he noticed something outside. A black sedan, parked across the street, engine running. 2 men inside. Not press, not police, not familiar. His mother followed his gaze. Who's that? I don't know, he whispered. He suspected, because when institutions start to collapse, people don't just run to protect themselves. Sometimes they come to silence the ones who told the truth. The State Education Board launched a formal investigation and subpoenaed the principal, just as a mysterious black sedan parked outside Malachi's home, watching. The courtroom lights felt brighter than they needed to be. Not harsh but surgical, designed to expose. Rows of wooden benches filled quickly that morning, lined with journalists, activists, parents, and students wearing school colors muted by unease. The city had turned its gaze inward, and the walls of Westerbrook High now stood trial inside a building meant for justice, but stained by decades of what justice had ignored. Cameras were everywhere, hidden microphones in blazer pockets, legal analysts, live tweeting from the back row. Outside, vans from 5 networks lined the block like satellites circling a fallen empire. It wasn't just about a school anymore, it was about the pattern. The machine, the mirror held up to the entire system. Principal Daniel Rourke sat stiff in his chair, tie knotted with mechanical precision, jaw set in legal rehearsals. He'd been warned not to speak unless asked. Vice Principal Holt sat beside him, eyes unreadable, fingers twitching slightly, as he thumbed through a folder of notes he couldn't afford to misplace. Malachi sat in the 3rd row from the front, flanked by Lena and Janelle, both dressed in solemn tones like they were preparing for a funeral. Maybe they were. Not of a person, but of a legacy. The prosecution called their first witness, a former guidance counselor who had resigned 4 years earlier, now standing with eyes low and voice hesitant. Her testimony didn't startle the room, but it cracked the door wider. She spoke of unusual expectations, of meetings where staff were told to protect the balance of representation, and of whispers that certain students, always black, always new, needed to be monitored for academic instability. Then came the second witness, a tech contractor, formally hired to upgrade the school's digital filing system. He testified under oath that he'd been asked to disappear a folder named Retention Phase Protocol, and when he hesitated, was terminated mid-contract with an NDA slipped under his hotel door. The audience shifted in their seats as footage was played. Parts of the whistleblower interviews, the second challenge video, the digital trail of faculty messages and internal memos. Each frame drove a nail deeper into the illusion Westerbrook had spent decades protecting. Then, something changed. The defense stood to cross-examine the IT contractor. Isn't it possible, the lawyer began, that the files you saw weren't actually part of any conspiracy, but simply administrative drafts taken out of context? No, the man replied without blinking. Because one of them had my name on it. It said I'd complied quietly, and can be reused. I'm not a draft, I'm a witness. Gasps filled the gallery. Someone whispered, he just buried them. The judge called for order. But what buried them deeper was what happened next. Security footage was submitted from the school's own server. Footage from 3 different years, showing students escorted out of the building mid-semester, under vague infractions. Most of the tapes had audio stripped. But one, a recovered backup, captured a short exchange from a hallway, recorded by accident during an emergency drill. It was Rourke's voice. He was speaking to Mr. Kellman. She's too visible. Time to redirect the spotlight. Use the mental health angle. The room went still. Even the stenographer paused for a second, eyes wide before continuing to type. Across the aisle, Rourke shifted in his chair for the first time. Holt leaned forward, whispering something fast and low. But the judge didn't need more. He ordered Rourke to take the stand. The principal walked slowly to the seat, face drained but still composed. Under oath, he denied everything. Denied knowledge of the challenge framework. Denied involvement in faculty-led manipulation. Denied ever authorizing grade tampering or surveillance. When pressed on the voice recording, he claimed, that wasn't official business. It was a hypothetical discussion. You called for redirecting a student's visibility using psychological labels. The prosecutor shot back. That's not hypothetical. That's strategic erasure. I was speaking in metaphor, Rourke replied. But metaphors couldn't erase the files, or the footage, or the names read aloud again, in court that day. Khalil Wren, Alicia Green, Aaron Boone. When the prosecutor requested Malachi to testify, a hush spread across the courtroom like smoke. He walked to the stand slowly, every step echoing not with fear but with weight, not just of his own story, but of all the stories stitched into his. He answered their questions calmly. Yes, he had been challenged in front of the school. Yes, he had known the answer and chosen not to give it. Yes, he had found a pattern buried beneath the surface. And yes, he believed Westerbrook had never intended for him to succeed. But it was his final answer that reshaped the energy in the room. Why didn't you fight back sooner? The prosecutor asked gently. Malachi looked straight ahead. Because when you're black and brilliant in a place that wasn't built for you, surviving becomes more important than winning. The silence that followed didn't need explanation. Even the defense said nothing. Then, just as the judge was preparing to call a recess, a figure stood up at the back of the room. No one had seen her enter. No one had her name on the witness list. But she stepped forward with the confidence of someone who didn't need permission. Malachi turned, and his breath caught. It was his mother. She walked toward the front of the courtroom without hesitation, holding a thin folder in one hand. The judge blinked, caught off guard, but allowed her to approach. I'd like to submit evidence, she said. Not just about what happened to my son, but what happened to me. When I was a student at Westerbrook, the room collectively exhaled. The judge leaned forward. You were a student there? Yes, she said calmly. Class of 1998. I was the top of my class for 3 semesters. Then I disappeared from the rankings. My guidance counselor told me it was a clerical error. My senior project never got submitted. My college application packet, the one I handed in early, was never sent. She opened the folder. Inside were photocopies, old report cards, progress forms, hand-marked rubrics, and one final sealed envelope that had never been opened. It was postmarked addressed to Harvard University. It still had a stamp. She handed it to the prosecutor. The courtroom held its breath as Malachi watched his mother, the woman who had always told him to work twice as hard, now stand where no one had ever imagined her. And in her eyes he didn't see defeat. He saw fury sharpened by years of silence. A surprise witness walked in. Malachi's mother, once a student at Westerbrook, and revealed she too had been erased by the same system, decades earlier, and had kept the evidence all this time. The courtroom had never been quieter than in the seconds after Malachi's mother sat back down. Even the air itself seemed frozen, caught between disbelief and recognition. No one moved. Not the stenographer, not the bailiff, not even the reporters who had been typing non-stop since the trial began. It was as if the building itself was trying to process what had just happened, that the system on trial hadn't just failed once or twice, but had cycled through generations, recycling silence into policy. The judge leaned forward and addressed the courtroom. In light of new testimony, We are calling the plaintiff, Malachi Boone, to the stand once more, not as a witness, but as a voice of the record. Malachi stood without hesitation. The room no longer felt hostile. It didn't feel safe either, but it felt ready. And this time he didn't walk like someone proving he belonged. He walked like someone who'd already reclaimed his place. He took his seat, adjusted the mic, and faced the jurors, 12 people, whose expressions ranged from heartbreak to horror. Some had children. Some were former teachers. One, he could tell, had been crying through most of the last hour. No one looked bored anymore. No one looked impartial. "I'm not here to defend myself," he said, voice low but clear, "because I was never the one on trial." He paused, letting that settle. "I was invited to Westerbrook on a full scholarship. I was told it was a place that rewarded excellence. But what they didn't say out loud was that there was a ceiling over that promise. A silent one that adjusted depending on what you looked like, where you came from, and how well you blended in." The jurors leaned closer. "I wasn't punished for failing. I was punished for being good. Too good. Quiet, focused, black and unwilling to play the part they needed me to. I didn't break the rules. I disrupted their illusion." He glanced briefly at Principal Rourke, who wouldn't meet his eyes. "And I wasn't the first. You saw the files. The timelines. The footage. Every 3 years, a student just like me was erased. Not with one big decision, but with dozens of little ones. A changed grade here. A missed opportunity there. A planted whisper. A faked scandal. They called it tradition. Some even called it order." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. This wasn't about education. It was about control. They built a system where black success had a time limit, where too much excellence became a threat, where being smarter than the top student made you dangerous. One juror wiped tears with a tissue folded in their lap. "I didn't ask for this fight," Malachi continued, "but I'm here now, because you need to see what survival looks like when everything is designed to convince you that you imagined the blade they held to your back." He pulled out a folded piece of paper from his jacket. Slowly, deliberately. "This is my original admission letter to Westerbrook, signed by the district superintendent. It says I was selected based on my academic record, personal statement, and potential to impact the culture of the school." He looked up. "I did that. I impacted the culture, just not in the way they wanted." He held the paper out for the clerk, who stepped forward to accept it. "I'm not asking for pity or sympathy. I'm asking for acknowledgement. Not just for me, but for Khalil, Alicia, Aaron, my mother, every student who got swallowed by this place and had to carry the silence like a scar." He sat back slowly, then said only one more thing. "Redemption isn't something they give you when they're ready. It's something you take back when they've run out of excuses." Silence again. The judge nodded and signaled the bailiff. "The jury may now begin deliberations." Malachi returned to his seat beside Lena, who didn't speak but placed her hand gently over his. Janelle exhaled so hard, it sounded like she had been holding her breath the entire trial. Hours passed. Reporters filed stories live from outside the courthouse. Students from across the state gathered around the building with posters, candles and signs, not shouting anymore, but waiting. Together. And then, just before sunset, the courtroom doors opened again. The jury had returned. 12 people walked in with heavy faces. No smiles, no relief, only gravity. The foreman, an older black woman with steel gray hair and a gold cross around her neck, stepped forward with the paper in hand. Her hands didn't shake. The judge nodded. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have." She handed the note to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. The room swelled with one collective heartbeat. The judge scanned the page, then looked up. "Please read the verdict aloud." The foreman turned to the courtroom, unfolding the slip of paper. She opened her mouth, then paused, just for a second. Long enough to make the room lean forward. Long enough to make Rourke's throat tighten. Long enough for Malachi to feel the weight of every name that never got to hear what he was about to hear. But the foreman wasn't hesitating from nerves. She was holding back tears. The jury foreman stood up with the verdict, but paused just before speaking, her voice trembling as she prepared to deliver a judgment that would ripple beyond the courtroom. The foreman's voice finally broke through the tension, trembling but unwavering, as she read the verdict aloud. And in that moment, when the courtroom absorbed every syllable, something shifted far beyond Westerbrook. Something national, something cultural, something long overdue. Within hours, the verdict swept across every news channel in the country. Headlines scrolled on the bottom of TVs in airports. living rooms, classrooms, and government buildings. For the first time, people outside the city were learning the truth about a school that had quietly curated excellence by targeting those who exceeded its comfort. The footage of Malachi standing as the judgment was read, head high, hands steady, tears held back with unflinching discipline, went viral. Not because he intended it, but because America recognized something familiar in him. A young black student who had done everything right, only to face a system designed to break him. And for once the country wasn't looking away. Protest ignited overnight. In cities across the nation, thousands marched holding signs carved with three simple words: "Let us rise." Students from every background gathered outside their own schools demanding transparency in academic ranking, disciplinary records, and counselor recommendations. News anchors debated systemic sabotage in education. Professors wrote op-eds dissecting decades of bias hidden under meritocracy. Even celebrities posted support online, amplifying Malachi's story as a symbol of a truth too many families already knew. But Malachi wasn't basking in attention. He watched the uproar quietly from home, still suspended from school, still carrying the weight of everything he had exposed. The verdict didn't erase what he endured. It didn't erase the humiliation, the doubt, the ache of being underestimated by people who insisted they believed in fairness. But it offered something new, the first real breath of possibility. Lena visited him that evening, sitting beside him on the couch as footage of the protests played on TV. "They're calling it the Boone Reform Act," she said softly. "A coalition of colleges is meeting to address discrimination in early admissions." Malachi almost laughed. "I never wanted any of this." "Maybe not," she replied, "but you were strong enough to carry it." Outside, neighbors had placed candles along the sidewalk, a gesture of solidarity. Reporters stood across the street, interviewing anyone who might have known the boy who challenged a system. His mother, who had stayed silent through the media frenzy, finally allowed herself a small, tired smile. She had spent years carrying her own buried scars from Westerbrook, and now the world had heard her truth too. The next morning, Malachi received a letter, this time delivered directly to his door, not hidden, not ignored. It was from a top university that had once been a distant dream. He hesitated before opening it, half expecting disappointment, half expecting irony. But when he unfolded the paper, he saw only this: "We honor the resilience you demonstrated. Full scholarship awarded. Welcome." His mother sat down beside him, tears rising, as quietly as breath. "You earned this," she whispered. "They couldn't take it from you. Not this time." But even as positive change rippled outward, not everyone celebrated. Faculty members from Westerbrook resigned under pressure, but others disappeared into silence without comment. The district superintendent stepped down, citing health concerns, though everyone knew it was fear. Emails leaked of board members arguing about liability, insisting they never condone discriminatory practice while privately panicking about lawsuits. And across the country, in schools with polished hallways and pristine reputations, administrators watched the verdict with tight jaws. Because the spotlight wasn't just on Westerbrook anymore. It was widening. On social media, students from other elite schools began posting anonymously. "This happened to us too. We had challenge rituals, just like Westerbrook. My scholarship disappeared when I ranked too high." The nation wasn't just watching Malachi's rise, they were questioning their own institutions. On the final day of his suspension, Malachi returned to school. Not through the back entrance, not quietly, but through the front gates where hundreds of students waited, cheering as he walked through. Some wore shirts with his name printed across the back. Others carried signs, not of protest this time, but of recognition. "We see you. Thanks to you we can rise too." He didn't absorb the attention. He didn't bask. He simply walked toward the school's doors with a composure he had earned through fire. Inside, the halls were lined with reporters. He declined every interview, offering only one statement: "I didn't win. We did. And the work isn't done." He walked to his locker, opened it, and removed the USB drive, the same one Dennis had slipped to him in quiet rebellion. He held it for a moment, honoring what it had meant, then placed it into a sealed envelope, addressed to the state investigator overseeing the case. "This belongs to the people who can finish the fight," he said to Lena. She nodded, eyes glistening. But even as Malachi reclaimed his place, far away in another state, hundreds of miles from Westerbrook, another story began to move. In a sleek office lit by sterile white LED panels, a teacher at an elite preparatory academy opened her email after returning from lunch. She wasn't expecting anything unusual. Maybe faculty memo, a new testing policy, or a parent complaint. Instead, she found one message sitting in her inbox. No subject line, no signature, just a single sentence. Your next candidate has been chosen. Attached was a student photo. A black boy, smiling, bright, unaware. In another state, a teacher opened an email reading, "Your next candidate has been chosen." The cycle wasn't gone. It was spreading. If you believe voices like Malachi's should be protected, not punished, type yes in the comments. Have you ever seen brilliance silenced because of what someone looked like? Share your story. Subscribe to stand with those who challenge systems built to erase them. Together, we don't just tell stories, we expose what was never meant to be seen.